You trusted him with your retirement. Your parents trusted him with theirs. Entire charities trusted him with the money meant to feed families, fund hospitals, and pay for scholarships. And for 18 straight years, he looked every single one of them in the eye and lied. Because on a December morning in 2008, in a Manhattan office with mahogany walls and a view of the city that made him rich, a man sat calmly while federal agents read him his rights. He did not run. He did not deny it. He simply said 7 words that would end up wiping out more retirement accounts, more charities, and more human lives than almost any single financial crime in American history. He said, "It's all just one big lie." For nearly 2 decades, almost nobody believed that it could be. And by the time you finish this video, you may never look at a safe investment the same way again. This is the story of the largest Ponzi scheme ever uncovered, a fraud so large, so patient, and so quietly devastating that it fooled some of the smartest investors on the planet. Banks fooled, regulators fooled, retirees fooled. Even his own employees for years had no idea they were part of a machine built entirely out of trust and paper promises. And the most unsettling part of this story is not how the lie was built. It is how easily people wanted to believe it. To understand how a scheme like this survives for nearly 20 years, you first have to understand something uncomfortable about human psychology. People do not fall for scams because they are foolish. People fall for scams because the scam feels safer than the truth. The truth about investing is that returns are unpredictable, markets are volatile, and even the best professionals lose money sometimes. That truth is uncomfortable. So when someone offers a version of investing without that discomfort, steady returns, low risk, month after month, year after year, something in the human brain relaxes. It stops asking questions. It starts trusting. That is exactly what this man offered. Not explosive returns that would attract suspicion, but something far more seductive: consistency. While the rest of the market rose and fell like a roller coaster, his funds seemed to glide 10, 11, 12% almost every single year, regardless of what the economy was doing. No wild swings, no painful losses, just steady, believable, comfortable growth. And that consistency became the perfect disguise. Wild, unbelievable returns attract scrutiny. Believable returns attract trust. That is the first hidden truth this story reveals, and it applies to every investor watching right now. The most dangerous financial promises are rarely the ones that sound too good to be true. They are the ones that sound just believable enough. He did not start as a fraud. That is important to understand, because most financial disasters do not begin with a criminal mastermind plotting an empire of lies. They begin with someone who built something real. In the early 1960s, he started a small brokerage firm with a modest amount of money he had saved from working as a lifeguard. Over time, he became a genuine pioneer, someone who helped push the stock market toward electronic trading, someone respected enough to eventually become chairman of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. This was not a man operating in the shadows. He was operating in the light, at the very center of Wall Street's respectability. That legitimacy became his greatest weapon. People did not just trust his returns, they trusted his reputation, his position, his decades of visible success. And that reveals another uncomfortable truth about financial trust. Credibility is not the same as safety. A polished reputation, a prestigious title, a respected name, none of these things guarantee honesty. They only guarantee that people stop checking. Somewhere along the way, likely in the early 1990s, according to later investigations, the legitimate investment business quietly transformed into something else entirely. Instead of actually investing the money clients gave him, he began simply pretending to invest it. New money coming in from new investors was used to pay returns to earlier investors. No real trades, no real portfolio. Just an illusion sustained by a constant flow of new cash. This is the mechanics of a Ponzi scheme, named after Charles Ponzi, a con artist from the early 20th century who ran a similar fraud with postal reply coupons. But what made this version so dangerous was the scale, the sophistication, and the sheer number of years it managed to survive. Here is where the story becomes genuinely unsettling, because a Ponzi scheme should not be able to survive for 18 years. Mathematically, these schemes are designed to collapse. As soon as more people want their money out than there is new money coming in, the entire structure crumbles. So how did this one last so long? Part of the answer is chillingly simple. He created fake account statements, printed on paper, mailed to clients, showing trades that never happened, showing gains that never existed. Investors saw numbers going up on a page and believed those numbers reflected reality. They had no reason to doubt it. The statements looked professional. The firm looked professional. He looked professional. Part of the answer is about who he chose as investors. He built his client base largely through word of mouth, through country clubs, synagogues, charitable galas, and social circles where trust was already established before money ever changed hands. This tactic even has a name among fraud investigators: affinity fraud. When a con artist targets a tightly knit community where personal trust replaces financial due diligence. If your neighbor is invested, if your synagogue's charitable fund is invested, if your golf partner has been getting steady returns for a decade, the social pressure to trust the same opportunity becomes enormous. Questioning it can feel less like smart skepticism and more like an insult to your own community. And part of the answer is about exclusivity. For years, he did not eagerly chase every investor who wanted in. He turned people away. He made access to his fund feel like a privilege rather than a product. Psychologically, this is one of the most powerful manipulation tools that exists, because human beings do not just want good returns, they want access that other people cannot have. When something feels exclusive, scrutiny goes down and desire goes up. People became so eager to be accepted into his fund that many never seriously questioned how the returns were being generated in the first place. Think about how strange that actually is, when you slow down and look at it honestly. In almost every other area of life, when someone makes it hard for you to give them your money, you get suspicious. If a mechanic told you he was too busy to look at your car and you had to beg for an appointment, you would not assume he must be brilliant. You would assume he is either genuinely in high demand or he is running some kind of act. But in the world of high finance, scarcity gets reinterpreted as prestige. Being told no makes people want in even more. And once they are finally let in, gratitude quietly replaces skepticism. That single psychological switch, from questioning an opportunity to feeling grateful for one, is where an enormous number of financial disasters truly begin. There is also a quieter mechanism at work here, something behavioral economists call social proof combined with authority bias. When a person of obvious wealth, status, and industry credibility invites you into something exclusive, your brain does a kind of mental shortcut. It reasons that a person this successful, this respected, this embedded in legitimate institutions would have no reason to lie, and even less reason to risk his own reputation. That reasoning feels logical in the moment, but it quietly ignores a much older truth about fraud, which is that the most successful liars are rarely amateurs. They are often the most polished, most credentialed, most reassuring people in the room, precisely because that polish is what allows the lie to survive scrutiny for years instead of days. There were warning signs. There always are, in hindsight. A financial analyst named Harry Markopoulos spent nearly a decade trying to warn the Securities and Exchange Commission that the returns were mathematically impossible to achieve through the strategy the firm claimed to use. He ran the numbers himself, tried to replicate the same trading strategy, and could not come close to matching the consistency being reported. He submitted detailed reports laying out exactly why the fund's performance defied basic market logic. He was largely ignored. This detail matters enormously because it destroys one of the most comforting myths people tell themselves about financial safety. The myth that regulators and institutions will always catch the fraud before it's too late. Sometimes they do, but sometimes the warning signs sit in a filing cabinet for years, while ordinary people keep depositing their life savings into a fund built on nothing but paper and trust. It raises a question worth sitting with for a moment. If a trained financial analyst could identify glaring inconsistencies using nothing but public information and basic math, why did an agency with subpoena power, examiners, and legal authority fail to act for so long? Part of the answer is bureaucratic. Part of it is about how intimidating a respected Wall Street name can be. even to the people whose job is to investigate it. And part of it is simply about how institutions, just like individuals, can fall into the same trap of trusting reputation over verification. The lesson is not that regulation is worthless. The lesson is that regulation is not a substitute for your own due diligence, because even the systems built specifically to protect ordinary investors can be slow, distracted, or outmatched by a confident enough liar. By the mid-2000s, the fund had grown to encompass thousands of investors, university endowments, charitable foundations, retirement funds, and wealthy families who believed they had found one of the safest, most consistent investment vehicles in the world. Some had their entire life savings tied up in it. Some charitable organizations had their entire operating budgets invested in it. The illusion of stability had become so convincing that people stopped diversifying, stopped questioning, and in many cases, stopped checking anything at all. Then came 2008. The global financial crisis did something that no regulator, no whistleblower, and no internal audit had managed to do in nearly 2 decades. It created a wave of investors who suddenly needed their money back. Markets were collapsing everywhere, and panicked clients began requesting withdrawals in amounts the fund could not possibly cover, because there was no real underlying portfolio to draw from. The music stopped. The new money coming in could no longer keep pace with the money going out. And the entire structure that had survived 18 years of ordinary economic cycles finally met the one force a Ponzi scheme can never survive: a crisis that makes everyone want their money back at the same time. In December of 2008, he confessed to his own sons, who reported him to authorities the very next day. The fraud, once revealed, turned out to be staggering in size, with losses estimated to be in the tens of billions of dollars when accounting for the fabricated statement balances investors believed they had. Thus, he died behind bars in 2021. Picture what that final collapse actually looked like from the inside for the people who trusted him. A retiree checking a statement that showed a comfortable, steadily growing balance. The exact number they had planned their entire retirement around, only to learn days later that the real number was 0. A small charitable foundation that believed it had tens of millions of dollars in reserve to fund scholarships and community programs, discovering instead that the money simply was not there, and never really had been in the way they imagined. These were not abstract losses on a spreadsheet. They were mortgages that could no longer be paid, retirements that had to be postponed indefinitely, and charitable missions that quietly shut down. The damage of a scheme like this is never contained to a single headline. It ripples outward into thousands of ordinary lives that had absolutely nothing to do with Wall Street. But the ending of his story is not really the ending of this story, because the real lessons here are not really about one man. They are about the psychological weaknesses inside every investor that made a scheme like this possible in the first place. Weaknesses that have not gone away simply because his name became infamous. The first lesson is about the danger of consistency without transparency. Real markets are volatile. Real investments fluctuate. Any financial product that promises smooth, steady, low volatility returns year after year, without a clear, verifiable, independently audited explanation for how those returns are generated, deserves more scrutiny, not less. Steadiness is not the same as safety. Sometimes steadiness is simply the smoothest possible mask for a lie. The second lesson is about the danger of outsourcing trust to social proof. When people decide whether an investment is safe based on who else is invested, rather than on independently verified evidence, they are making a decision based on psychology, not on financial reality. A crowded room of confident investors is not evidence that an investment is legitimate. History has shown repeatedly that entire rooms of intelligent, successful people can be wrong together. The third lesson is about the illusion of institutional safety. Investors trusted this fund partly because it seemed embedded within the legitimate financial system, tied to respected names, sitting within an ecosystem of accountants, auditors, and regulators who were supposed to be watching. But an accountant operating out of a small strip mall office, largely unknown within the profession, was responsible for auditing a multi-billion-dollar fund for years. Nobody meaningfully checked. The presence of institutional sounding infrastructure does not guarantee that infrastructure is actually functioning the way people assume it is. The fourth lesson, and perhaps the most important one, is about the emotional trade investors unconsciously make. Every investor who chose this fund was, in effect, choosing comfort over verification. They were choosing to not ask uncomfortable questions because the answers they were already receiving felt good enough. This is not unique to one scandal. It is a pattern that repeats across nearly every major financial fraud in modern history. From Ponzi's own postal scheme in the 1920s to modern cryptocurrency collapses. The technology changes. The promises change. The human vulnerability underneath it all almost never does. What makes this story worth revisiting, even now, decades later, is not the shock value of the numbers. It is the mirror it holds up to how we all evaluate financial trust. Most people believe they would never fall for something like this. They imagine fraud as something obvious, something clumsy, something a careful person could easily spot. But this fraud did not survive for nearly 2 decades because it was obvious. It survived because it was patient, believable, socially reinforced, and wrapped in every outward symbol of legitimacy that our minds are trained to associate with safety. The uncomfortable question this story leaves behind is not simply, how did so many people get fooled? It is a much closer, much more personal question. What are the modern versions of this same illusion sitting quietly inside your own financial decisions right now? Disguised not as a scandal, but as something that simply feels too steady, too trusted, and too comfortable to ever question. Because the truth is, fraud like this never really disappears. It evolves. It changes its name, its industry, its packaging. Sometimes it wears the label of a hedge fund. Sometimes it wears the label of a real estate syndicate promising guaranteed monthly income. Sometimes in recent years, it wears the label of a crypto platform promising fixed returns that beat the market no matter what the market is doing. The outfit changes. The psychology underneath it stays exactly the same. Consistency without transparency. Trust built through community instead of evidence. Exclusivity that quietly discourages questions. If you remember nothing else from this story, remember that the next fraud that finds you almost certainly will not look like a scam. It will look like the safest, smartest, most respectable opportunity you have ever been offered. That is precisely the point. That is how it survives. And here is the part of this story that never makes it into the headlines. The people who lost everything were not careless. Many of them were doctors, teachers, small business owners, retirees who had spent 40 years building something responsible and modest, only to watch it vanish because they trusted the wrong signals. This is not a story to make you feel superior to the people who were fooled. It is a story to make you a little more careful than they were allowed to be. Ask who is actually holding your money. Ask who is independently verifying the numbers you are shown. Ask what happens to your investment in a year when everyone wants their cash back at once. If those questions ever feel unwelcome, uncomfortable, or unnecessary, that discomfort is not rudeness. It is one of the only real defenses an ordinary investor has. Safety and the illusions that quietly shape the world of money. Make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories like this one still coming. Stories about the hidden mechanics of wealth, the psychology behind financial disasters, and the lessons Wall Street would rather you never learn. Subscribe now, so the next warning reaches you before it becomes your own story instead of someone else's.